We've asked Sister Bridget Klingman from the Dominicans to introduce our panelists and our moderator. We've got a pretty tremendous group here. So, Sister Bridget, are you ready to go?
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me to do this. We have 4 panelists. The first on the list given to me is Regina Strong, who is an environmental justice public advocate for the state of Michigan. This is a new position for the state, and she is working within the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. Previously, she was the Michigan director for the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign. Lisa Oliver King is the founder and executive director of Our Kitchen Table in Grand Rapids. With funding from Kellogg Foundation, Our Kitchen Table is developing a set of best practices for the community women to improve health and wellness by building healthy neighborhood food systems, learning to address systemic change in order to become food secure, and building better neighborhood-based sustainability. Maria Thomas is an independent activist involved in sustainability, environmental justice, civil and human rights. She's most recently the field team coordinator for voter engagement campaign of Detroit Disability Power. She works for Solidarity, a Highland Park nonprofit working for energy democratization. And finally, Sultan Mohammed, who is a youth advocate specialist for the Grand Rapids Public Schools. As an educator, mentor, and community organizer, Mr. Mohammed is found consistently working hands-on with community stakeholders with a target on youth to improve community conditions. And our moderator tonight is Deidre Courtney, a doctoral teaching assistant in the Institute for Intercultural and Anthropological Studies at Western Michigan. Her research interests are climate change adaptation and mitigation, as well as climate change migration and displacement. She founded Schools for Climate Action Michigan, serves on the City of Portage Environmental Board, and is a member of the National Black Climate Action Network and Citizens Climate Lobby. So I think I turn it over to Deidre.
Thank you very much, Sister Bridget. That was a mouthful, and I'll just say I'm glad you had to say it all and not me. So I want to thank WMEAC for inviting me to be the moderator today for this particular talk, our panel discussion, just by way of a couple of housekeeping items. We'll ask that everyone but the panel keep your mics on mute if possible. We'll have sort of like a round robin discussion here. We'll ask a series of questions, and the panelists, you're welcome to have your mics off of mute. And also, if by the end, if you have questions, please add them to the chat. So I think this is a very, in particular, it's a very important time here in 2020 where we're experiencing one of the worst pandemics of our time, especially when you think about all of the impacts on African Americans, other people of color, and the disproportionate impacts that they're experiencing. It's so important that we now connect the dots between environmental justice and coronavirus. We have a very distinguished panel with us tonight, and we are very excited to hear from each of you. I'd like to thank you again for coming, and we'll jump right in. If it's okay, I'd like to start with you, Regina, with our first.
Somehow I knew you were going to do that, but that's okay.
Okay. So the first question is, what would you say is your definition of environmental justice and how that relates to advocacy for you?
So essentially, environmental justice is really all about making sure that everyone has, equitable access. They receive equitable treatment and real meaningful involvement in our environmental laws and regulations. I mean, the way that we approach things from the state perspective is definitely evolving. My role, which you mentioned which Sister Bridget mentioned in the introduction, is new to the state. And it was created intentionally as not just an environmental justice office, but a public advocate office, because really, essentially, for any environmental justice role, you have to take into account impacts. As an advocate, I'm kind of a lifelong advocate. I've advocated in several industries over the years, and I've done housing, and there's so many issues that are near and dear to my heart, in particular from the environmental standpoint. I spent many years working to really transition our energy generation from, fossil fuels to renewable energy. And in that work, I learned a lot about the real disparate impacts that some communities have as it relates to both our industrial past and could have in terms of, as we move forward, our renewable future. And so the equity piece of environmental justice is hugely important, because we have to not just look at impacts, but opportunities to change that. A big part of my role within the state has to do with advocacy externally and internally. Getting, the varying departments that sit, for instance, on our interagency environmental justice response team, which was also newly created when my position was created, to really look beyond what they may typically see and think about equity in the work that we do, and what are the systemic issues within how we do what we do that have disparate impacts on communities. There's been a lot of conversation about, COVID, for instance, and as you know, environmental justice communities were hit particularly hard. And a lot of, health access disparities and other things were, they weren't revealed to the people experiencing them, but it was new information for a lot of folks who, saw through this unfortunate pandemic how those disparate impacts really can have, deadly consequences for some communities. So I say all that, it's a long answer to your question, but I say all that to say that, environmental justice is really about curing those inequities, right? It's looking at, even though we call it environmental justice, is really about curing injustices, right? Making sure that there is equitable access, making sure that the historic wrongs that have put us kind of in the positions we are in now are addressed. And that's what the movement and advocates who fight in this space really have, pushed for decades. And so I'm excited that the state is, we're really taking a hard look at, how we address those.
Thank you. Lisa, can you talk a little bit about how these same questions about environmental justice and advocacy, how that sort of plays out with you and your organization, Our Kitchen Table?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for asking Our Kitchen Table to be a part of the panel. I just want to clarify, Our Kitchen Table no longer has funding from the Kellogg Foundation. We do have funding from other organizations, but not the Kellogg Foundation. And following Regina, I hope I said your name correctly. She gave a really good definition around addressing environmental injustice. So Our Kitchen Table, we do food justice, food advocacy work. And it's kind of strange, the pandemic has allowed us to, we're dealing with issues like many organizations are dealing with in terms of being overwhelmed. So Our Kitchen Table, we help people to grow their own food garden, and we give them a food garden coach and a cooking coach to help them through this process whether they're a new grower or someone who has experience with growing. And to be quite honest, normally within a given year, we work very closely with Grand Rapids Public School, High Sultan, Grand Rapids Public Schools, and in particular with pre-K through first grade and middle schoolers. And normally requests for growing their own food, and they grow food at the school site, would be probably between, I would say 28 to 35 families. We had 125 families request growing their own food. One was based on the shortage that we experienced in our grocery stores. And two was we want to have more control. We want to know where our food is coming from. It was kind of scary to see the, I guess you can say, previous administration make the meat companies essential workers. It was scary to knowing that that pandemic was running through those factories, and the lack of regard for those individuals and what they were being subjected to. Families that we work with saw that and said, that is me. And I am scared where my food is coming from, and I want to understand how to grow my own food and how, you know, what can you do to help me? I am more than willing to lean more towards a vegetarian, vegan diet. What the heck is that? Can you help us with that? And, you know, we need some help more than just being able to go to a pantry. And so it allowed us to have conversations around what's going on, growing in ground versus growing through in containers. It allowed us to have conversation around climate change. It allowed us to have conversations around water and conservation of water and lead. I mean, it for us, it opened up being able to have a honest conversation about environmental injustice, environmental racism, and what that looks like in their neighborhoods, and how can they do more than just grow their own food, but become an advocate for their neighborhoods to be stabilized and sustained more so in a sound way. Because whenever we get this, whenever COVID is going to be addressed, how do I say this? We're going to be the last ones to receive the benefits of what that may be. And so we got to stand up for ourselves. We have to come together as a collective and figure out how we're going to deal with this. And so it's allowed us to be able to talk about what is environmental injustice, what is environmental racism, and how as a collective can we address it now and beyond now. Because the reality is, just like we've seen more people of color passing away due to this virus, we're going to be the last to get vaccinated. That's the belief around that. We understand that those avenues will not open up, and all of a sudden we're going to be thought about as a collective in marginalized neighborhoods. So we got to take some action. So it really opened up that conversation that Regina was talking about, understanding who our local organizations are that's working on this issue. What is the state's role in this? We were able to talk about the governor creating the COVID-19 task force, looking at issues around race and health. People were open to those conversations. They wanted to know who they were. How can we support them? Because when we support them, maybe we will get some help in our neighborhoods. But we understand that we can't do it alone. There are personal actions that we need to take, as well as collective actions that we need to take. Many of these families that we've worked with have experienced people being exposed to COVID. They've lost people. We had several families who lost family members 1 hour after each other. We had one family that lost 3 family members in that way. And so it has hit close to home, and it has allowed us to have open conversation, and our kitchen table has had to figure out, with the overwhelming demand, how do we meet that? And so far, we've been able to do that.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Those are very, very important issues. I'd like to also open the same question to up to Maria. You are an independent activist and organizer, and I'd like to know how you sort of tackle this issue with the environment and advocacy in your own independent work.
Good evening, everybody. How are you?
Good evening.
It's good to see everyone this evening, and I pray that everyone is well and that everyone remains healthy in this trying time. We have to evolve. We have to evolve as a people. We have to unite. We have to unite as a people. If we are going to save ourselves, the environment, all those that dwell upon the earth, whether they be human or otherwise, and to prevent further irreparable harm to the earth that will survive once we become extinct, then we must evolve. We must stop fighting over the 10% that we differ in. 90% of the concerns of everyone in this room and virtually everyone around the world are the same, whether they have resources or not. They want a roof over their head. They want to be able to drink clean water. They want to be able to educate their children. They want to be able to live in a safe environment. What is wrong with us that we are threatening each other with guns, lying and calling it the truth, while the world is literally on fire? Environmental justice, to me, similarly to what Regina has stated, has to be looked at through a fair, just, and equitable lens as we transition from fossil fuels into what is considered new technology through clean energy. That technology, particularly when it comes to solar, in my opinion, is a gift from our Creator. I'm a person of faith. I will never disregard, I will never try to disrespect, I will never disown the fact that I am a person of faith. I'm a Christian. I'm a person of color. My color is very swirled, as people would say. It's mixed. It is not mixed because my ancestors chose to be mixed. These are things that need to be redressed in this country. These are things that cause the need for reform. If we are to survive as a people, we must understand that we are the same virtually, with the exception of 10%. And that 10% needs to be addressed and celebrated, in my opinion. Because once we celebrate it, listen, and learn from one another, that's how we can move forward and progress. So, that being said, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, one of the filthiest countries in the world. I'm sorry, one of the filthiest states in the country. I misspoke, I'm sorry. And I grew up very close to the zip code 48217, the filthiest zip code in the state of Michigan. I remember as a child, every day, the strong and heavy odor of sulfur in my neighborhood. Every day, except Sunday. I remember experiencing the first death of a young person. When I was in middle school, a very close friend of mine made her transition due to asthma. And I contribute that to the fact that we lived in an area that spewed heavy metals and other chemicals into the air and impacted her to the point where she could no longer survive. Many in my family suffer from asthma. Asthma is one of the largest contributors, in my opinion, to the severity of COVID. I have to be transparent with you. Today, I got confirmation that one of my grandchildren has contracted COVID. All A student, very healthy, football player, hardworking, has a job working at Walmart. And now his 3 siblings, mom and dad, are all quarantined, waiting for results from their tests to come back. I am terrified. They live not in an urban community. They live in Romulus, Michigan. But yet and still, they're impacted by this plague. And it is totally unnecessary. And I believe everyone in this room understands what I'm saying, that much of this is totally unnecessary. We must unite. We must make change. We must put pressure on those that feel that they have the desire and the whim to do anything. They should be able to do it. We must learn how to have restraint when it comes to the greater good for all of us. We can't be selfish. I am livid about what I am hearing, not just in Michigan, but across the country, as I speak to friends and comrades from the reservations in North Dakota, where one of my friends has lost 8 of their elders in the last week from COVID. My friends that live down the street from me, where the husband and wife go into the hospital, are sent home from the hospital and die the next day. This is unacceptable. So dealing with this plague, while we look at environmental justice, among other justices that still have not been successfully manifest in this country, we must understand that it's holistic. It's all connected. My God is a magnificent engineer. But if one thing is not being taken care of properly, it can throw everything out of order. And what I'm seeing now is that everything is out of order. We must be decent and in order. We can accomplish this, but we must act, and we must act soon. Now, the urgency of now is upon us. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, and that's so important. I mean, I'm also a grandmother myself, and that's definitely one of my biggest fears, being a grandmother and having children myself that suffer from asthma and grandchildren that also suffer from asthma. So I think, you know, I can speak on behalf of myself and definitely others here tonight that we're wishing your grandchild the best and hoping that everything works well with the family. And, you know, just, you know, we're in agreement that it's definitely important that we all need to work together to solve this issue.